My name is Eleanor Whitlock, and I was 43 the night my husband lifted his glass at our anniversary dinner, smiled at the woman I called my closest friend, and toasted to new beginnings. 20 days before he tried to leave me with nothing. The whole table laughed. I laughed hardest of all. I was the only person in that candle-lit room who didn't understand the joke, because the joke was me. Before I take you any further, do something small for me. Subscribe to Revenge Lab, because it's just the two of us in here and I like knowing you're close. Then tell me in the comments where you're watching from and how your day has treated you. And whatever kind of day it's been, I hope the rest of it is soft and bright and good to you. Now sit with me, and let me tell you how the man who spent 9 years calling me naive taught me, without meaning to, exactly how careful a quiet woman can be. His name was Grant Holloway, and in 9 years of marriage, he had never once seen me count. That sentence holds the entire story. He looked across a decade of dinners and mornings and saw a grateful, breakable woman who had gotten lucky the day she met him. It never crossed his mind to wonder what a grateful, breakable woman does at her own kitchen table after her husband has fallen asleep. He was about to learn. It would cost him everything he'd stolen, and a good deal more he thought was safe. But I'm rushing. Let me carry you back to the days when I still believed new beginnings was a clumsy toast, and not a confession said out loud where I couldn't hear it. You have to understand what Grant was to a room. He walked in and the air rearranged itself around him. Servers remembered his name and his order. My own mother, who had never called anything by an affectionate word in her life, called him the son I was owed. He'd grown a construction company from a single second-hand truck into a fleet of 40, and every handshake he offered felt like a gift he was choosing to give you. I loved that once. I loved being the woman on the arm of the man the whole room wanted a piece of. What took me years to see is that a man who can charm anyone has quietly learned the truth is a thing you can bargain with. Charm, in the end, is only lying that people thank you for afterward. There was a tell if you knew where to look. Whenever Grant said something untrue, his thumb found his wedding ring and gave it a small, slow turn. For years, I read that gesture as tenderness, a man touching home in the middle of a conversation. It was the opposite. That turn of the ring was the nearest thing to a conscience he had left, and it fired every single time he lied. The night of the toast, his business partner Dana laughed half a beat too late, and Grant turned his ring. I tucked both away without knowing why. I was already a woman who noticed everything and said nothing, and Grant mistook that silence for blindness. Remember the ring. It comes back. Everything in this story comes back because nothing in it was ever an accident. Her name was Priya Sethai, and she had stood beside me as my maid of honor. She knew my coffee order and my miscarriage and the exact size and shape of my loneliness. That spring, she began checking in on me more than she ever had. Long lunches where she asked, so gently, whether Grant and I had ever really signed anything before the wedding, whether I'd feel protected if things ever turned bad. Careful questions, the kind a sister asks. I answered each one the way a frightened wife would answer. I let her see me small and unsure. I let her carry every word straight back to him because I had already worked out that she would. How did I know? Because one afternoon, over a shared plate, she said the phrase, just paper. The exact 2 words Grant had used across a lawyer's table 9 years before, at the signing of our prenuptial agreement. Words she had no earthly way of knowing. Words only Grant, myself, and one lawyer had ever heard spoken aloud. She didn't even notice she'd used them. But I did, and something inside my chest went quiet and cold and very still. That was the moment I understood the shape of the thing coming for me. Not all of it. Only the shape. My husband and my sister were writing a story about a fragile, failing wife, and they were rehearsing it to my face and calling it lunch. Here is the first thing they never grasped about me. I don't test people to trap them. I test them to measure them. And Priya, God forgive her, measured exactly as long as the walk from my kitchen to Grant's ear. 9 years earlier, in the bright weeks before our wedding, Grant had slid a prenuptial agreement across a polished table and told me, warm as sunlight, "It's just paper, Ellie. It looks after both of us." I signed it. I thanked him for it. What Grant forgot because he stopped reading a person the instant he'd charmed them was that I had brought my own lawyer to that table. A soft-spoken man named Mr. Ackhaffer, an old friend of my late father. And Mr. Ackhaffer had folded in one small clause that Grant's eyes slid across without stopping, because it flattered Grant to move fast. The clause was simple. In the event of infidelity, every protection Grant had written for himself would collapse, and the estate would be divided only after full disclosure of everything either of us owned. Everything. Declared or buried. It was a liar's document rewritten so that it could only ever wound a liar. I didn't ask for that clause because I distrusted the man I was about to marry. I asked for it because Mr. Ackhaffer watched Grant turn his ring while he said, "It looks after both of us." And afterward, in the hallway, he said one quiet sentence to me. "Eleanor, a man this careful to protect himself is a man already planning for the day he'll need it." I was 26 and in love. I signed anyway, but I let Ackhaffer keep his line. Grant signed the way he did everything, quickly, warmly, certain the fine print was written for lesser men. He never read Ackhaffer's clause. Speed flattered him, and flattery was the only lock on his attention that ever truly held. The folder went into a safe deposit box, and for 9 years I told not one living soul it existed. Not my mother, not Priya least of all. I very nearly forgot it myself. And then, one spring, my husband quietly began to teach me to remember. The spring of that toast, the money started to move. I'm no accountant, but I had kept our household books for 9 years, the way a quiet wife does without being thanked, and numbers have a music to them if you listen long enough. When the melody changes, you feel it before you could ever prove it. A truck sold with no deposit landing anywhere I could see. A consulting fee paid to a company called Meridian Holdings. Registered, I would learn later, under Dana's mother's maiden name. Our little lake cabin quietly refinanced, $60,000 slipping out of view into an account with my name nowhere on it. He was hollowing our marriage out from the inside, sliding the money into the dark so that when the divorce arrived, the marriage would look poor, and Grant would be secretly rich. Here is the part I still turn over some nights. He grew careless around me on purpose. He left statements face up on the counter. He took calls in the next room with the door standing open. I've come to believe that somewhere in him he wanted me to see it, to see and to understand that I was helpless to stop it. Cruelty needs an audience, or it never quite feels like winning. So I became the witness he wanted, and none of the witness he expected. I didn't confront him. I photographed every statement, night after night at the kitchen table, while he slept the deep, easy sleep of a man who's certain he's already won. I built a second folder to lie beside the first, one holding his lies, one holding his lawyer's old promise, and I waited for the day the two would finally meet. Then I set the phone down, and I made his breakfast, and I turned my own ring on my finger the way he turned his, and I wondered which of us that little gesture belonged to now. I want to be honest with you, because you've earned honesty even where he gave me none. It was never cold. Every photograph took something from me. Each one was fresh proof that the man I'd loved had only ever been real in the rooms he chose to let me stand in, and that I'd built an entire life inside a house with painted windows. Grant filed for divorce in June, and he did it beautifully. He reached our friends first, gently, tenderly, and told them I had changed, that I'd grown fragile, that he was heartbroken but had no choice except to protect himself. He got to every one of them before I could speak a single word, and by the time the story reached me, half of them had already quietly agreed I was the sad, difficult wife. Priya wept at a dinner I wasn't invited to. Dana called me unstable to a mutual friend who repeated it to me later, ashamed of himself. His lawyers sent a settlement offer so small it was an insult in a good suit. A flat sum, the car, and my personal effects. The letter assumed I had no lawyer, no records, no notion of what our life was worth. It assumed I was precisely the woman I'd let Priya paint for him all spring, the naive, breakable Eleanor, grateful for whatever scraps a generous man might spare her. And here is the cleverest cruelty of it. He had made me the villain of my own leaving. If I fought, I'd prove I was bitter and unstable, exactly as he'd warned everyone. If I didn't fight, I'd walk out with nothing and prove him kind and wronged. He believed he had built me a room with no door anywhere in the walls. He'd forgotten he handed me the only key 9 years earlier and told me it was only paper. I read that letter in my car in a grocery store parking lot, and I laughed until I cried. And then I simply cried for a long time, with the engine off and the world moving on outside the glass. The plan was working, and the plan was mine, and being right felt exactly like being alone. Nobody ever warns you that justice, close up, is almost indistinguishable from grief. Then I dried my face and I called Mr. Ackhaffer, old now, his hands trembling a little, and he answered on the second ring, as though he had spent 9 years waiting for the phone to make that one particular sound. "Eleanor," he said, before I'd spoken a word. "I wondered when you'd come for the folder." Mediation was held in a glass conference room high over the city, and Grant walked in like he'd built it. He nodded at me the way a man nods at the help. His lawyer opened with the tale of the fragile wife. I let them tell it. I let Grant lean back in his chair, loose and certain. Then Mr. Ackhaffer laid 2 things on the table between us. First, the prenup, open to the infidelity clause, initialed in Grant's own confident hand. Second, a folder of photographs, 9 months of hidden transfers, the shell company, Dana's mother's name, the refinanced cabin, every page dated and cross-referenced, with a forensic accountant's letter clipped neatly to the top. Then the last page, a hotel receipt and a second one, and a florist's record, all in Grant's name, all pointing at the same address on the same nights he'd sworn he was away for the firm. The single fact that turned his own prenup into a blade aimed straight at his chest. The florist's record was the detail that finished him, and I need you to understand why. The flowers were white lilies, the same white lilies he'd once sent to Priya's mother's funeral, the same ones he had told me gravely he would never buy for anyone else again out of respect for the dead. He'd been sending them week after week to the woman he was seeing. Even his betrayal had a signature, and he had signed it in a flower. Grant's lawyer stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. Grant's smile held on his face a full 5 seconds past the moment it stopped meaning anything, like starlight arriving from a sun that's already gone dark. His hand rose, and across that table, for the first time in 9 years, I watched him turn his ring, and this time he knew I was watching, and he knew that I finally understood what it had always meant. For the first time in our whole marriage, I saw Grant Holloway do arithmetic and land on a number he couldn't stand. The infidelity clause triggered full disclosure, and full disclosure is a pitiless thing. Every dollar he'd hidden became evidence of fraud instead of proof of cleverness. A court does not reward a man for robbing himself in order to cheat his wife. It punishes him for it, coldly and completely. He didn't walk away with half. He walked away with what remained after every buried dollar was clawed back into the marital estate and divided under the honest terms he'd fought so hard to escape. Meridian Holdings collapsed. The vanished $60,000 came home. The lake cabin came to me. And so did the truth, delivered to every friend who'd believed his version, because findings of fraud are not private. And Grant had spent 9 years borrowing trust from a great many people who now, suddenly and urgently, needed to be seen standing far away from him. Dana's own firm cut him loose to save itself. That maiden name on the shell company had bound them together, and when Grant went under, the current dragged Dana down behind him. No coincidence there either. He had chosen his accomplice for loyalty, and loyalty, it turns out, is only a shorter rope to the same long fall. Priya sent a text. 3 paragraphs, the word misunderstood used twice. I never answered it, not out of spite. There was simply nothing inside it to reply to. You cannot answer a person who was only ever a message being carried back and forth between 2 other people. The self-made man had unmade himself, and every brick of the ruin was one he'd laid with his own certain hands, sure to the very last that he was the only soul in the room who could read a blueprint. Now let me tell you about the ring. All through the marriage it had meant belonging, that I was chosen, that I was his, that I was safe inside his choosing. Through the divorce it sat in my jewelry box, meaning only that I had been fooled. I nearly threw it into the lake a dozen times. I didn't. I sold it, and I gave every dollar to a legal aid fund for women who sign papers they are told are just paper. The afternoon I signed that donation, the ring stopped meaning I had once been his, and began meaning that no woman it helped would ever again have to make herself small in order to feel safe. He called me naive for 9 years, and he was right about exactly one thing. I did trust him completely once. That was the naive part. Everything after, every photograph, every swallowed word, every gentle question I let Priya carry home to him, was only a woman who had quietly decided to stop being surprised. They mistook my quiet for weakness. My quiet was only ever the sound of a woman keeping her receipts. The man who told me it was only paper never once imagined I would read every single word. And that, in the end, is the whole of what he never learned about the woman across his table.